All right, welcome to the Ironwood Gym. Today, I'm going to go over the RDL, or the Romanian deadlift, which I'll explain kind of a little bit of history on that in just a second. But hopefully, you got a chance to check out my video about good mornings. If you haven't, check it out. You can look it up. It's got a very complicated or fancy name that I gave to it. I was very creative in coming up with the name. The title of it is The Good Morning. So look that up, check it out. It's kind of a long video, and the reason being is that I went into a lot of different variations of the Good Morning and kind of broke several, not all of them. It was not an exhaustive list by any means, but I went into several and kind of went over each one as far as how to do it and what you're getting out of it and how it benefits you. Today we're going to look at the RDL, okay, or the Romanian deadlift. So the first thing, the RDL was created years ago, and it was named after some coaches or lifters, or someone saw a Romanian weightlifter doing this exercise. His name was Nicu, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly, but I believe it was Nicu Vlad. And they saw him doing this exercise and saw how strong he was, so then they decided to do the exercise the same way he's doing it, or close to it, and call it the Romanian deadlift, which now most people just call it the RDL. The Romanian deadlift, which in my opinion, it is the greatest posterior chain developer that there is. All right, I don't think that there's anything that compares to training the entire posterior chain. And I'm not just talking low back, glutes, and hamstrings. I'm talking from your traps all the way down to your hamstrings. Your traps are utilized extensively, very extensively. Your rhomboids are used. Your lats are used to a great degree. And then, of course, the low back, the glutes, and the hamstrings are all utilized to a very high degree. I'm not saying, and I think this needs to be clear, that if you're looking at improving your squat or looking at improving your deadlift, you need to look at the specifics of your technique and the specifics of your weaknesses. Just because I think that the RDL is the greatest posterior chain developer doesn't mean it's what you need to improve your squat. You may need to do a variation of the Good Morning or the Good Morning itself. The same with the deadlift. The Good Morning may be better for improving your squat or deadlift, but that's going to depend upon you, your technique, and your weaknesses. The RDL may be a good option. It may be a better option. But I can give you a few different reasons why the Good Morning would outperform the RDL in regards to improving a squat or a deadlift, or a clean, or or different variations, different things that you would do as a strongman. So I'm not trying to minimize the Good Morning in any way in saying that the RDL is better as far as developing the posterior chain. Because when I look at the Good Morning and the RDL, the Good Morning, or the RDL, does some things in regards to the upper back that the Good Morning is not as effective at. So with that discussion aside, let's turn more to the RDL. Okay. There is also a debate: what is better, the RDL or the stiff leg deadlift? Okay. I'm not going to entertain that argument here, because in my mind, they're just about the same thing. There's not a lot of differences. I will give you one difference here in a minute that I do think is significant if you perform the stiff leg deadlift in that manner. But most of the time people don't. They're basically calling it a stiff leg, but doing the same thing as an RDL. And they'll argue with you, well, I'm not doing RDLs, I'm doing stiff legs. it's pretty much the same thing, okay? And I've watched several videos over the differences between the two, and I've seen different things as far as what people say is a stiff leg and what people say is an RDL. But I mean, we're talking about these small differences that I don't think really makes that big of a difference. One being that they say that the stiff leg always starts on the ground, and an RDL starts out of the rack, which is how I'm going to demonstrate it here in just a minute. But let me just ask you a question on that. After the first rep, does it really matter? Okay, unless you return to the ground and stop on the ground on every rep on your stiff legs, after the first rep, you're just doing RDLs. Okay, even if you're touching the ground, but it's touch and go, you're doing the same thing as an RDL. It's no different. Again, I'm not going to get into that debate. That's my thoughts on it. That's how I see it. Now, with the stiff leg, I have seen people intentionally try to round their back as they go down. Sometimes they'll stand on blocks to do it so they can get greater range of motion, but they will intentionally round their spine to get more work in their low back, in their spinal erectors, maybe even in their lats to a certain degree. In that case, yeah, I think we're talking about a different exercise. But if you're keeping your back locked in, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. I think we're talking about such minute differences, it really doesn't make a difference. So I'm going to talk about the RDL because that's what I call it, and that's how it'll be. The RDL, a lot of similarities to the good morning. So if you didn't see my good morning video, as I already stated, go back and check that out. Look that video up, and you will see the similarities between the two. When you're doing the RDL, the key thing is when you take the bar out of the rack, your back should already be set. If you deadlift the bar off the floor, you want your back set before you deadlift the bar off the floor. Make sure you're in proper position there and then perform your deadlift. Depending upon, I've seen college strength coaches teach it specifically, deadlift the bar on the first rep, do RDLs after that. That's fine, that's one way you can do it. I prefer to take it out of the rack. In fact, I think I've had athletes do that myself. But I prefer to take the bar out of the rack. When you do that, you're gonna lock your back in, pull your shoulder blades tight. They don't necessarily have to be squeezed all the way together, creating this big chest, but they should be stiff. There should be no movement in your upper back. There should be no movement in your lower back. Everything should be locked in. Your abs, your obliques, your upper and lower back should be locked in to that posture that you want. That posture should never change throughout the lift. The exercise is a hip hinge, hip dominant exercise. Your lats and your traps are utilized to maintain position, position of your back, as well as maintain proper position of the bar as you're lowering the bar, even as you're coming back up, but definitely as you're lowering the bar. Because if you leave your upper back loose, okay, watch what happens with my arms. If my upper back is loose, my arms come out away from my body. Okay, and the further I go down, my shoulder blades are getting pulled apart, my lats are not holding everything into position. And this part right here is why I think this is a better overall posterior chain developer than the good morning. Because in a good morning, now if you're a heavy, hardcore lifter that really puts a lot of stock in the good mornings, you're probably really getting cranked down. But everything from there is an isometric contraction. And it's an overcoming isometric contraction versus a yielding isometric contraction. With your general athletes, even though you teach them that, some of them may still just get into position enough to hold it, where you can't get away with that with the RDL. The RDL, you're going to actually have to focus on maintaining control of that upper back as you do the exercise, or else you will lose position. With holding that position, I started to talk about overcoming isometrics and yielding isometrics. The yielding isometrics in this is going to be what's causing your upper back to work, because a yielding isometric is one where you should be holding a position, this position here, but the weight is essentially pulling you out of that position. The overcoming isometric is basically you're pushing or pulling against a fixed surface that you can't pull it any further. That's going to be that bar on your back where you pull it down and lock it in. You can't do anything else from there. You can't keep pulling it further. It is being pulled down into that tight position. The RDL, it's pulling away from you. So you have to resist that and pull yourself back into position. Okay, so that's going to be your upper back. Your lower back, it's easy to let that round, but you're going to keep that locked in as well. From there, you're working with your hips. Let me turn around and face this way. I think it'll show better. From there, everything comes from my hips. I'm going to push my hips back, okay, while maintaining posture. I'm not lowering myself. I'm not lowering my upper body. I'm pushing my hips back and letting my upper body come down as a function of my hip movement. So as I push my hips back, my lower body has to come down. I'm getting a hard stretch in my hamstrings. When I get to that point where my hamstrings can no longer, or where it really feels like my hamstrings are to their, I don't want to say a complete stretch, maybe a complete loaded stretch, that is the point where you're going to want to come up. So that may be a little bit different between athletes or between lifters. Some may be able to go further due to better flexibility. Others may not be able to go quite as far. And you can't just judge it by where the bar is in relation to the floor, because if you have a lifter with long legs, short torso, and short arms, and this does happen, they're going to get to parallel. Their body will be parallel to the ground, but the weights will still be significantly off the ground. Where you get someone that has very long arms, especially if they have shorter legs, they get to not even to parallel, and the bar is already touching the floor. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Judging depth should be judged by the tension created in the hamstrings and the glutes, not by how close the bar is to the ground. And I get it, when you're a strength coach and you're working with 50 athletes at one time, sometimes it's better to say we want the bar to touch the floor or an inch from the floor and give everyone the same landmark spot. I understand it, I get it, but ideally it has more to do with the stretch that you're getting in the hamstrings and the glutes, and utilizing that to determine when to come up, not necessarily how close you are to the floor or if you're touching the floor. So anyway, moving on, I get that stretch, I'm in my bottom position, I still have my back locked in, I have that stretch in my hamstrings, there should be a flex in my knees, which you can't see right there. So there should be a flex in my knees. I'm not straight-legged. When I start to come up, it's a rotation of my hips. I'm going to rotate my hips forward, okay? That's all I'm going to do is I should feel the stretch of my hamstrings and glutes going down. I get to that point, I rotate my hips forward, and that's the finish of the lift. I'm not trying to over pull. I'm not trying to pull up with my back straight up. I'm bringing my hips into the bar, okay? That's how I bring the weight back up. Focusing on turning or rotating those hips. So let's take a look at it with the bar. When I get in here, my grip should be the same as what I use for a clean or for a conventional deadlift, okay? You can go double overhand, especially if you use straps when it gets heavy, or you can go ahead and turn to that alternate grip. I'm just going to use a double overhand grip for the purposes of the demonstration. But the same width as a clean or the conventional deadlift. I'm going to get my back locked in before I take it out. My back and abs are locked in, my shoulder blades are pulled back and down. Stand up, one step on each leg is plenty. From here, I push my hips back, get a good stretch in my hamstrings, rotate my hips to come back up. Okay. I don't actually know how close I was to the floor. I'm a little tight right now. I squatted this morning, so may not have been getting quite as low as I'd like to. But I was getting a very good stretch on my hamstrings, a stretch in my glutes. It was right to that point I felt like my lower back was going to break as far as breaking posture. That's when I reversed the direction and came back up. I'm not going to try to stretch it down further. All right. If I'm losing posture in my low back, I'm defeating the purpose of the exercise. When I come back up, okay, I rotate my hips to come back up. I bring my hips through. I get to the top. My glutes should be squeezed. I'm not trying to over pull. All right. I'm not trying to over pull with my back to get it further. I'm just coming up till my hips are through. My hips come through, they lock, that's it, okay? And then I go back down into my next rep. That is basically it, okay? That's basically it. I'm gonna show you two different variations of that. The first one is basic, and then I'm gonna put a different camera angle on it, and you can see some different, so you can see it from a different angle. The next variation I'm going to show you is just an isometric RDL, or a RDL hold, if you will, however you want to call it. It's the same thing. All right, it's the exact same thing as what I just showed you, but you're going to pause in that bottom position. And I do these every once in a while. I don't do a ton of them, but I do think that they're good. It's a good strengthener for your lower back, training isometrically in that bottom position and building up strength there. Kind of shifts to me. It feels like I get more out of my low back by doing that isometric hold first, rather than as much when I don't do the isometric hold. It's almost predominantly hamstrings, glutes, and a little low back as far as maintaining position. But when I do the hold, at least as far as how I feel it, I feel like I get more emphasis shifted to my low back. So it's the same basic thing. Take my grip on the bar, get everything locked in first. One step on each foot. Now when I come down in that bottom position, I'm just going to hold. Still using my hips to rotate and come back up. And still utilizing, making sure that I'm getting a good hard contraction, pulling my back tight the entire time, because as I wear out, if those weights are heavy and I start to wear out, I will start to lose that upper back posture. I want to keep those shoulder blades pulled back, my lats pulled down, so that bar stays in tight to my legs the entire time. Okay. So next, I'm going to show you the wide stance, and after that, I'll switch the camera angle. So the wide stance, you're probably going to feel a little bit more in your hamstrings and more in your hips. Other than that, it's the same basic movement, okay? You still want to have a flex in your knee. I'm not going to bend my knee. I don't want to start squatting with it. Same thing as a regular good morning. I didn't say that, but you don't ever want to start to squat, but you do want to have flex in your knee as you push your hips back. So with the wide stance, I'm going to move my feet out closer to closer to the edge of the rack. Depending upon the height of your lifter, you may need to do different. If you're working with someone that's very tall, they may need to do it on the outside of the rack so they can put their feet out wider on the platform. Someone that's shorter may not need to go to the edge of the rack. It just depends on their height, their leg length, and their flexibility. But with the wide stance, you might want to take your hands and move them in a little bit closer. Probably more closer to your sumo deadlift grip. Other than that, I'm still going to pull everything tight. I'm going to start with normal stance. And as I walk out, I move my feet out to the side. Okay? I still have everything locked in. From here, I push my hips back, get a good stretch in those hamstrings, rotate my hips to come up. Okay, I'm going to switch the camera angle now so you can see really the difference between stances. You get to see that wider stance directly from behind. Okay, so now we're going to look directly from behind so you can really see the difference in stance width. With my normal stance is going to be more similar to my conventional deadlift, or if you're working with athletes or you're a weightlifter, more similar to your clean stance. And I do go fairly narrow on that. Instead of shoulder width or anything like that, I'm definitely inside my shoulders. Then I will do a couple reps there, maybe 2 or 3 reps, and then I'm going to move out to the wider stance, and you can see the difference it's a pretty significant difference, okay, that I have between my regular stance and my wide stance. Again, the difference being with the wider stance, or if you want to call it a sumo stance, I'm going to put a lot more emphasis on my hamstrings. My hamstrings are really going to work a lot harder. With the conventional stance or the regular stance, still going to be working my hamstrings to a very significant degree. Probably just not quite as much as the wider sumo stance. The wider sumo stance will also bring your hips into play more. Even though you're not squatting, you're still going to be utilizing the outside of those hips with that wider stance. So do 3 reps with the regular stance first, then I'll move my stance out, I'll rack it, change my grip, move my stance out, and I'll do 3 reps with the sumo style. Okay. So again, clean grip, conventional deadlift grip on the bar for my regular stance, because I need my hands to go outside my legs. Get my back set first, shoulder blades pulled back and down, lats pulled down. 1 step on each side is all I need. Inside shoulder width stance. Push my hips back, get the stretch, rotate my hips to come up. Okay. Now, moving my feet out, my hands have to come in. Okay, I'm going to come in more to my sumo deadlift grip, maybe slightly wider, but definitely not out like the regular grip. My feet are going to go out. Same thing, push my hips back, rotate my hips to come up. So tighter grip on the bar. Get my back set, shoulder blades pulled back and down, lats pulled down. Out wide, toes angled out a little bit. Push my hips back. Rotate my hips to come up. Okay. All right, so that's the RDL, or the Romanian deadlift. Not quite as versatile as the good morning. But if you're just looking for posterior chain development, top to bottom, I'd say your RDL should be your go-to. Okay, that should be your #1 pick. If you're looking at more specific things, such as I need this to fix this part of my squat, or I need this to fix my deadlift, the good morning may be a better option. You just have to kind of weigh exactly what you need against what you're getting out of the different variations of good morning or the RDL. For programming, or for the RDL, there's a lot you can get out of those 3 variations. For me, most of the time, I'm just going to do the basic RDL and try to push that up heavy. But there is a time and place to do those isometric holds. I like to hold at the bottom. If you're a weightlifter, or if you have a certain need that necessitates you hold in different positions, certainly you can get out. You can get something out of holding at different positions, just below the knee, above the knee, and utilizing your isometric work from those points. For the wide stance, if you really need to hit your hamstrings, or you feel that that's going to help benefit, if you pull sumo as a power lifter, that's going to benefit you, then the wide stance could definitely be a good option, something you can get a lot out of. Some programming tips. For RDLs, I like higher volume to a certain point, but I also really like to push them heavy. Higher volume to me is going to be anything probably 10 reps or more. I would probably stick like 10 to 15. The downside to doing those higher reps is your grip will start to give out. So make sure you're switching to an alternate grip so that you're working your hamstrings and the rest of your posterior chain and not just working your grip. If your grip starts to give out, you're not working the posterior chain nearly as effectively at that point. So it would be better to switch your grip to an alternate grip, or possibly even utilize straps to make sure that you are working the posterior chain and you're not limited by what you can do with your grip. And the same thing goes when it starts to get heavier. Now for heavy sets, I generally don't go anything below sets of 5, but I will take those sets of 5 just about to a 5 rep max. I'm really going to push the weight on that and try to get as much out of it as I can. The key things that you have to watch out for is, as you're pushing that weight, or as you fatigue with higher reps, that you're not losing your posture. Okay, that your upper body will go first. You'll start to kind of lose those shoulders. The next thing that'll go will be your low back. So that's first. The first thing you have to look for is maintaining your posture. The next thing you're going to want to look for is that you're not just working from your low back, that you're still pushing your hips back hard. You're getting that stretch in your hamstrings and your glutes, and then you're rotating your hips to come back up. That is key. Rotate your hips, turn your pelvis to bring yourself back up. If you're getting to a point where all you're doing is straining, it's easy to forget to utilize your hips, and all of a sudden you're only utilizing, but you're putting more of the emphasis on your low back, trying to bring that bar back up, and at that point, you're not getting out of it what we need to get out of it. Learn to utilize your hips. Stay disciplined to make sure that you're utilizing your hips, you're rotating your hips to come back up. Even when the weight is super heavy and it's harder to feel that, you still want to focus on utilizing those hips. Sets wise, if I'm doing higher volume, I'm probably only going to do around 3 sets. When I start to move the weights up, that'll increase to 4 or 5 sets. This is generally a second movement for me, a supplemental movement, so it would fit right in after I squatted or after I deadlifted. Then I'm going to bring in my RDLs, and then I'll move on to the rest of my workout. This is not something I do late in the workout. It's gonna be the number 2 movement. As a weightlifter, it might fall down to number 3 because you're gonna have your clean or your snatch first. Then you're probably gonna go to a squat or a deadlift, and then your RDL. At least that's how I would do it if I was training a weightlifter. If you have any questions, that'll be it for today. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. If you just have feedback, maybe I forgot something, don't be afraid to bring it up. Put it in those comments. I'd love to hear from you. But until next time, always be in the pursuit of strength.